It was a cold Sunday evening in March when everything started to shift. My sister Julia had come to dinner, as she did once a month, and I'd prepared everything the way Mom liked it. Simple, nothing too salty. I'd even baked the lemon loaf Julia used to love when we were teenagers, back before the silence between us had turned into a wall no one wanted to climb. We sat around the small round table in my parents' dining room. Me, Julia, and our aging parents, Harold and Elaine. They'd been slipping lately, forgetting names, repeating stories. That night, they forgot I was even there half the time. Julia didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. Her red nails clicked against the wine glass as she laughed a little too loudly, telling a story about some trip to the Keys with her new boyfriend. She always had a boyfriend. Always someone with a boat, or a business, or a slick haircut. Me? I had bills, a cat, and a full-time job at the public library. Julia took a sip of wine, leaned back in the chair like she owned the room, and said, "You know, Mom and Dad always loved me more. I mean, come on. You were always the quiet one, the weird one." It hit me like a slap. The room didn't even go quiet, because Mom just smiled faintly, and Dad chuckled as if she was joking. I stared down at the fork in my hand, trying not to let the flush creep up my neck. I didn't say anything. I just smiled, nodded, and kept chewing. After dinner, I washed the dishes alone. Julia scrolled through her phone in the living room, and Mom napped in her chair while Dad muttered to himself about the old furnace. I stayed silent, but something changed in me that night. It was like watching a wall shift, revealing something you'd tried hard not to see. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing Julia's voice in my head like a radio I couldn't turn off. "You were always the quiet one. The weird one." The words burrowed deeper than I wanted to admit. I wasn't 15 anymore, crying into my pillow after she stole my diary and read it aloud to her friends. I was 58. I paid the bills. I cleaned our parents' house every week. I made sure Mom had her heart medication and Dad didn't forget his cane. Julia showed up for birthdays and Christmas, took pictures with them, and left before the dishes were done. The next morning, I sat on the back porch with my coffee, watching the wind toss around last year's dead leaves. I thought about what it meant to be the other sister. Not the beautiful one, not the favorite, just the reliable one. The one who never asked for anything because she already knew the answer. Around noon, Mom called. She'd forgotten what day it was and couldn't find her reading glasses. I drove over, found them sitting on top of the microwave, and stayed long enough to help her relabel the spice jars she couldn't read anymore. Dad tried to fix the dripping faucet but gave up after 10 minutes and went to nap. The place was falling apart, and so were they. I asked Mom if she'd considered getting help, someone professional, even just part-time. She looked at me, a bit offended. "I don't want strangers in my house," she said. "I have you." I didn't say anything. But again, that quiet shifting happened in my chest. That slow recognition that maybe they never saw me as a daughter with her own life, her own struggles. Just the helper. 3 weeks passed. Julia didn't call. She didn't visit, but I did. Twice a week, like always. Until the day Dad fell. He was trying to fix the broken gutter out front. He got up on the second step of a ladder and lost his balance. His wrist was fractured, and he had bruises all along his hip. Mom was the one who called me, panicked and breathless, saying she couldn't lift him. I left work early, drove over, and stayed the night. I helped him use the bathroom. I made sure he ate. I changed the sheets. I told my boss I needed to reduce my hours, just for a while. 2 days later, Julia showed up. Not alone. She brought some man named Greg, a stocky guy with a loud laugh and a Bluetooth in his ear. "Poor Dad," she said, stepping over the mail I hadn't sorted yet. "We were just in Atlantic City when Mom called. Good thing we came, huh?" I didn't answer. While Dad dozed on the couch, Julia opened a bottle of white wine she didn't offer to share and whispered to me in the kitchen. I mean, we're going to have to split the work now. You can't expect me to handle everything. Everything? I looked at her hands, manicured, holding a glass she hadn't washed, and I felt something inside me lock into place. I didn't argue, I didn't scream, but I started planning. The thing about resentment is that it doesn't shout, it simmers. It brews in quiet corners, under polite smiles and folded laundry, in the long drives to pick up prescriptions, in the scrubbing of toilets no one thanks you for. And every time Julia showed up with her perfume and empty words, it simmered hotter. I started keeping notes, not out of spite, at least not at first. I told myself it was for practical reasons. A spreadsheet on my laptop where I logged each hour I spent at the house. Grocery receipts, appointment records, medication lists. But with every entry, I started to see it more clearly. This wasn't just helping. It was unpaid labor, emotional labor, life-altering sacrifice. And no one, not even Mom, saw it that way. Julia continued to visit irregularly. Sometimes she'd bring food, takeout, always cold, and leave after 30 minutes. One evening, she suggested we hire a cleaner, someone to deal with the clutter. I asked who would pay for that. She blinked, laughed, and said, "Well, not me. I'm stretched thin, too, you know." I wanted to ask her, "What exactly are you stretched thin from? The tanning appointments? The beach weekends?" But I didn't. Instead, I wrote it down, word for word. Not me. I'm stretched thin, too. It made the list. One afternoon in early May, the lawyer called. "Mrs. Taylor," he said, "your father asked that we reach out to both you and your sister regarding early discussions about power of attorney and estate planning." I paused. Estate? Yes. He mentioned some concerns about forgetfulness, about making sure both daughters are informed. We'd like to schedule a meeting. It was the first time in years I'd heard the word daughters used in the plural when discussing responsibility. I agreed to come in, on the condition Julia would be present too. When I told Julia, she groaned. "Do we really have to get into all that now? They're not dead yet." "They don't have to be dead for you to care," I replied, sharper than I meant. She rolled her eyes. "Fine. Schedule it. I'll squeeze it in between client calls." The meeting was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up, I noticed Dad asking the same question 3 times in the span of 10 minutes. Mom burned the rice twice. They were fading faster than I wanted to believe. The night before the meeting, Julia sent a text. "Greg might come with me. You know, in case it gets legal." Legal? That word sat heavy in my chest all night. The meeting with the lawyer took place on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in the same gray blazer I wore for job interviews. Julia swept in late, of course, soaked but unapologetic, her hair frizzed just enough to annoy her, her heels clicking loudly down the hallway like warning shots. Greg came too. He wore a navy sports jacket over a polo shirt and greeted the lawyer like they were equals. I noticed he didn't take off his sunglasses, even indoors. The kind of man who always needs an audience. We sat in a square room that smelled like paper and tired coffee. The lawyer, Mr. Conway, was polite but firm. He explained what power of attorney would mean and how our parents were entering a stage where decisions might need to be made on their behalf. Financial, medical, even long-term care arrangements. He slid the forms across the table. "Your father indicated he wanted both of you involved, but he left the specific arrangement to be decided between you." Julia leaned back, arms crossed. "I mean, it makes sense if I'm the one. I'm better with money, more level-headed." I opened my mouth, then closed it. Greg spoke next. "We've actually talked about hiring a professional caretaker and leasing the house. Your parents could move into assisted living, and the income could offset costs." My stomach twisted. I turned to Julia. They don't want to leave their home. They won't know the difference soon, Julia replied, too casually. And if we keep letting them rot in that house, someone's going to get seriously hurt again. I looked at Mr. Conway. I've been caring for them for over a year. I've documented every hour, every purchase. I've put my job on hold. I think I should be primary. Julia scoffed. Are you trying to get control over everything? Is that what this is? I kept my tone flat. I'm trying to protect them from being treated like a business transaction. The meeting ended without a signature. Mr. Conway suggested we take some time to come to an agreement, and I could tell by the look on his face that he'd seen this before. Sisters who weren't really sisters anymore. In the car ride home, the silence between me and Julia was colder than the rain outside. Greg was the one who broke it. You're emotional, he said from the back seat. That's why Julia should handle it. I gripped the wheel tighter but didn't respond. We dropped them off, and I didn't even wait for Julia to close the door before pulling away. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my spreadsheet, my stack of receipts, and a blank page. I started writing a letter to Mr. Conway, outlining the hours, the costs, the medications I managed, the cleaning, the driving, the falls I'd caught just in time. I included quotes from Julia, exact words, dates, not because I thought it would change her, but because someone needed to remember the truth. And then I did something I never thought I would. I emailed my boss and resigned from the library. Not because I wanted to give up my career, but because the math was clear. If I didn't make my parents my full-time job, no one else would. As I closed my laptop, I realized something. I wasn't planning anymore. I was preparing. It's strange how silence changes after a decision is made. Before, it was filled with doubt, hesitation. Now it was focused, useful. In the following weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Mornings began early. Breakfast for Mom and Dad. Medication checked off a list I taped to the fridge. I arranged for handrails to be installed in the bathroom, and a visiting nurse came by twice a week. I was careful to keep every receipt, every invoice, and I emailed copies of everything to myself, creating a paper trail Julia couldn't twist. Julia didn't call, not once. But I knew she was watching. Her name popped up on Dad's bank statements, small withdrawals here and there. When I asked him about them, he blinked, confused. She said it was for groceries, he mumbled. But there were no groceries, no receipts, just quiet subtraction. I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I made another appointment with Mr. Conway. This time, I came with a binder. He read through my documentation slowly, carefully. At the end, he looked up and said, "You've done more than enough. If you want to move forward with becoming sole power of attorney, we can proceed. But I'll need your parents' signed consent." That was the tricky part. They trusted me, but they also still saw Julia as their little girl. The charming one, the fun one. The idea of cutting her out of the process felt unnatural to them. So I didn't frame it that way. I told them I was just taking on more so Julia wouldn't be burdened. Burdened! The word almost made me laugh. The papers were signed 2 days later. Quietly. In the kitchen, while Julia was God knows where. Dad was tired. Mom just nodded and said, "You've always been the steady one." It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a funeral. A week later, Julia found out. She came storming into the house like a tornado, Greg trailing behind her. I was folding laundry in the living room. She didn't say hello. "You had them sign it behind my back?" she hissed. "Are you out of your mind?" I stayed calm. "They signed willingly. You've been absent. Someone needed to act." "You're jealous," she spat. "You always were. This is about control. You want to keep the house, the money." "There's barely any money, Julia," I snapped, "and the house is falling apart. This isn't about winning. This is about keeping them safe. Greg stepped forward. We might get a lawyer. This feels shady. I met his gaze. You do that, but make sure your lawyer sees the documentation. Every single spreadsheet. Every log of your withdrawals. Julia paled. You're bluffing. I didn't blink. Try me. She left without another word. Greg slammed the door harder than he needed to. That night, I sat with Mom while she dozed, her hand in mine. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired, but I also felt free. Summer crept in slowly that year. The kind of slow where days blurred together, prescriptions to refill, meals to prepare, visits from the nurse. Dad was sleeping more, confused more often. Sometimes he called me by Julia's name. I stopped correcting him after a while. Mom was still herself, mostly, but quieter now. She'd sit on the porch and stare at the garden she could no longer tend, fingers twitching as though remembering how to pluck weeds from the soil. We settled into a routine. I started getting groceries delivered. I moved a bed downstairs for Dad so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. I sold my car to cover the mounting medical expenses. None of this felt noble. It felt inevitable. And then the phone calls started. At first, they were from unknown numbers. I ignored them. Then one evening, just as I was helping Mom get into bed, the landline rang. A man's voice, sharp, aggressive. You think this is over? He said. You can't just take everything. You think judges don't look at family history? Think again. He didn't say his name, but I didn't need to hear it. Greg. Julia hadn't come back to the house since the day of the argument, but she was busy behind the scenes, digging, spinning stories, maybe talking to lawyers. I knew her game. Emotionally absent for years, now suddenly desperate to control the narrative. I documented everything, every call, every voicemail. I updated my binder and kept it by the front door like armor. A few days later, I received a letter, not from a lawyer, but from Julia herself. It was 3 pages long, written in neat slanted cursive on expensive stationery. It began with a tone of false concern. I hope you're well. I've been thinking a lot about our family, and I truly want what's best for Mom and Dad. But by paragraph 2, the sweetness turned sour. I'm worried you're not thinking clearly. You've always been emotional. I'm concerned you may be making decisions that aren't sustainable and perhaps not in everyone's best interest. She was laying the groundwork, undermining me, pretending to be the sane, reasonable one, while quietly trying to paint me as unstable. There was even a suggestion at the end. If you'd consider stepping back, we could find a professional third party to take over decision-making. That way, no one feels overburdened. I read it 3 times, not because I was surprised, but because it still hurt. She wasn't just trying to fight me. She was trying to erase me, rewrite the last year like it hadn't happened, like she hadn't left me alone with all of it. I folded the letter and slid it into my binder. I poured a glass of water, and then I sat down and started writing my own letter. Not to her. To Mr. Conway. It was time to protect myself, officially. The letter to Mr. Conway took me 2 evenings to write. I was careful with my words, measured, not emotional. I laid out every fact, the medical records, the expenses, the deterioration of my parents' health, and Julia's absence throughout it all. I attached copies of receipts, notes from the nurse, even photos of the modifications I'd made around the house to make it safer. I also included Julia's letter, unaltered. Let it speak for itself. I emailed it late at night, after my parents were asleep. And then I poured myself a cup of tea, stared out the kitchen window, and waited. I knew this would stir things, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I'd earned the right to speak for them. I'd earned the right to not be silenced again. 3 days later, I received a reply from Mr. Conway. He confirmed receipt and said he'd be placing everything on file in case any disputes arose. That last part stuck with me, in case any disputes arose, as if this wasn't already a war. That weekend, I took my parents for a drive, just around the lake. The sun was out, and the air was clear. Dad nodded off in the passenger seat, mouth open. Mom hummed to a song on the radio. It felt like a moment carved out of a time before everything fell apart. When we got home, there was a car in the driveway. Julia's. She was sitting on the front steps like she belonged there, wearing oversized sunglasses and holding a Starbucks cup she hadn't brought for anyone else. I parked, helped my parents inside, and came back out. "You didn't respond to my letter," she said flatly. "I did," I replied. "Mr. Conway has it on record." She flinched just slightly. "You really think dragging lawyers into this makes you right?" "No," I said. "The last year of my life makes me right." Julia stood up, brushing invisible lint from her blouse. "You're blowing this out of proportion. We're family. You don't freeze family out." "You're right," I said, stepping closer. "Family doesn't vanish when things get hard. Family doesn't drain Dad's account and lie about groceries. Family doesn't send letters to lawyers pretending to be concerned while plotting to take over." She opened her mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. "We're done pretending, Julia. You made your choices. I'm just living with the consequences." She looked at me for a long moment. Her face was unreadable behind the sunglasses. Then she turned and walked to her car. "I'll be back," she said over her shoulder. I watched her drive away, and this time I believed her. It was almost 2 weeks before I saw Julia again. In that time, I tried to hold on to the small pieces of normal. Sunday pancakes for Mom, crossword puzzles with Dad, when he was lucid enough to focus. The nurse told me he was declining faster now. There were good days and bad, but the slide was clear. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a letter arrived. Certified mail. It wasn't from Julia. It was from a local elder care ombudsman's office. Someone had anonymously filed a concern about isolated elderly individuals under the exclusive care of a family member with no formal training. A request for an in-home welfare check had been initiated. I stood in the kitchen reading that letter, my hands trembling. I knew exactly who had filed it. Julia was trying to weaponize the system. She couldn't fight me in the house, so she was trying to drag me into court, or worse, get me investigated for neglect. It was subtle, strategic, cruel. The knock came 2 days later. 2 women, both polite, both clearly uncomfortable. I invited them in. I showed them everything, the labeled medications, the meal plan, the nurse's records. Dad slept through most of the visit, and Mom smiled and said, "My daughter takes wonderful care of us." They left an hour later, reassuring me that everything looked more than adequate. But the damage was done. My hands still shook when I folded the inspection form and slid it into the binder. That evening, I received a text. From Julia. "Nay, if you just listened to me earlier, none of this would have happened. We still have time to fix this. Just step back." No signature. Just that cold, clipped suggestion. Like we were negotiating a contract, not our parents' lives. I didn't respond. Instead, I printed the text and added it to the file. And then, I made a call I'd been avoiding. The nurse had once given me a card for a geriatric care attorney who specialized in elder protection cases. I dialed the number. The woman who answered had a calm, firm voice. I told her everything. She didn't seem surprised. "This happens more than you'd think," she said. "And it sounds like you've already done everything right. But it's time to go a step further." We scheduled a meeting. That night, I made tea and sat in the dark. My cat curled at my feet. Somewhere upstairs, Mom was humming in her sleep. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was about protecting my parents from someone who'd never truly seen them as people. Only obstacles or opportunities. And if Julia wanted a war, then I would fight. But I'd do it the right way. Quietly, thoroughly, and I wouldn't lose. The lawyer's office was in a quiet, converted house on the edge of town. Nothing flashy, just a plaque on the door and a firm handshake at the entrance. Her name was Valerie Price, and she had the steady presence of someone who'd seen too many families torn apart by entitlement and greed. We sat in a small room lined with files and aging law books. I handed her my binder, and she turned each page slowly. No rush, no judgment. When she finished, she looked up and said, "You've done everything right. Most people walk in here with half the truth and none of the paperwork. You've got both. That gives you power." Power? Not something I'd ever associated with myself before. But I felt it now, steady, earned. We discussed my rights, what Julia could and couldn't do, and most importantly, what protections I could put in place moving forward. Valerie offered to draft a formal response to the ombudsman's visit and to file a cease and desist if Julia or Greg tried anything further. But the part that stuck with me most came at the end. "She's not going to stop," Valerie said gently. "People like her don't lose quietly, but if she escalates, we'll be ready." I left with a folder full of documents and a spine that felt a little straighter. The next confrontation came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday morning. I was folding laundry when I saw Julia's car pull up in front of the house. She didn't knock. She walked in like she used to when we were kids. Loud, dramatic, entitled. "Mom?" she called. "Dad?" I stepped into the hallway. "What are you doing here?" She held up a paper. "I have a right to see them. I spoke to a lawyer." "Did you now?" She tried to push past me, but I blocked the way. "They're resting." "I don't need your permission," she snapped. "Yes, Julia, you do. That's how legal guardianship works." Her eyes flared. "You're manipulating them, turning them against me. That's elder abuse." I didn't raise my voice. "You reported me once already. It didn't work. And if you try again, we'll see each other in court. I'll tell them everything. How you've isolated them, hidden things." "You mean protected them?" I said. "Because they don't need your chaos, or your boyfriend, or your fake concern." Julia stared at me, jaw tight, lips trembling. I don't know if she was about to yell or cry, but she didn't do either. She turned, threw the paper on the floor, and walked out. And this time, she didn't say she'd be back. Later that day, I read the paper she left behind. It was a printed list of rights for family members of aging parents. Half of it was underlined in red, a last attempt at control. But this wasn't her house anymore. Autumn came early that year. The leaves fell in gold and rust, coating the sidewalks like confetti from a quiet celebration. My parents both slept more now, sometimes 10, 12 hours at a time. Dad rarely spoke anymore. Mom still had her moments of clarity, but they were slipping away too. She called me by name less often. Sometimes she just looked at me with a smile, like I was someone she once knew in a dream. I didn't fight it. I didn't correct her. I just sat beside her and held her hand. I had taken a leave of absence from everything else. The library sent flowers once. A friend dropped off a casserole. The world kept moving, but our house felt paused, caught between memory and duty. Then, one Sunday morning, Julia sent me a message. Not a threat, not an accusation, just one line. They asked for me. Do I have the right to come? I stared at it for a long time. Legally, the answer was no, unless I allowed it. But morally, it was more complicated. I made tea, I sat in silence, and then I responded. Yes, you can come, but no Greg and no performance. She arrived an hour later. No makeup, no high heels, just Julia, older, smaller than I remembered. She brought a small photo album, the kind you get printed at pharmacies. She didn't say anything as I let her in, just nodded. Mom was asleep on the couch. Dad sat in his recliner, staring at a blank television screen. Julia walked over slowly, sat beside him, and said softly, Hi, Daddy. He didn't respond. She opened the photo album and began talking. Stories from childhood, vacations, jokes only she and he had shared. There was a warmth in her voice I hadn't heard in years. Not faked, not forced, just her. And when Mom woke up, her eyes flickered to Julia. You came, she whispered. I did, Julia said. I should have sooner. Mom didn't scold her. She just took her hand. I stayed in the doorway, watching, listening, a witness to something that wasn't forgiveness, but maybe something like understanding. Julia didn't stay long. An hour, maybe less. But before she left, she came to me. I'm not going to fight you anymore, she said. You're doing what I couldn't. I didn't speak. She stepped back. I hope, someday, you'll believe I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I nodded. That was all I could give. She left. And this time, I knew it was the last time she'd try to take anything from us. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with the binder in front of me. I didn't need it anymore, not really, but I kept it anyway, because it was proof, not just of what I'd done, but of who I had become.